Cool. Good. Nice. You're on time. I ain't put you on yet.
I find it was really looking so bad. How we held she close in the yard. She sit down there and start to cry like she going mad. The $2,000 I give to she was to buy a sandwich and a coffee. Not another thing happened. Me and the girl ain't nothing. That's all, that is all, that is all.
This song is real kicks, you know. This song is real vibes. I listening to this song whole afternoon and just laughing at the creativity of men when they want to do things, their worthless things, and then come up with their excuses. I guess maybe women are as adept as well. I will at some point in time ask that question about if women are as good as men when it comes to coming up with excuses for dubious behavior. So good evening, everybody. And the first point that I want to make: no aspect of my face this evening is Sasha makeup. No aspect of my face is Sasha makeup. If you want to understand what I'm alluding to when I say no aspect of my face is Sasha makeup, you could go and check my personal profile. Actually, no, I could possibly show you it here. Yeah, man. I could open it up and show you the thing here. This is like extreme madness right now. Extreme madness. Everybody whole unwashed ass just on display. So somebody using the Sasha Cosmetics profile put up this political post, and I am there wondering what politics have to do what politics have to do with makeup, right? People just want a little mascara, a little lip liner, a little eyeshadow, a little lip gloss, whatever. What politics have to do with that though? In any case, we are here to discuss education. And we are here to discuss education in a very specific way. It is the month of July, heading towards August, Emancipation Month. And I have decided to dedicate this month to having as many conversations as possible about the lies and stereotypes that are centered around persons of color, especially persons coming from West Africa, right? Or Africa as part of the enslavement colonial system that we would have had here. So I'm bringing on, you all already know who my guest is going to be. I'm bringing on somebody who I've known for more than a decade. I was trying to remember how long now Lovell and I know each other. And Lovell, how long we know each other, right?
Too long time.
I hear you on that, yes. I hear you on that. I wouldn't say too long, but definitely a long time.
A long time.
Definitely a long time. Just now, I'm trying to put like your whole title and thing here, because I was like, when people have degrees and thing, I just want to get on the title now. Especially since it's not self-appointed. Right, there we go. Good. No, you ain't give yourself the degree. You ain't, go on Tifa gown and put on a cap and walk down the aisle and them kind of things. So no, you studied for it. You're paying the hard work and thing. So
Did it the hard way.
Yeah, I want this to run much the way our interaction for the entire time we've known each other has run. Wherein, we bump into each other on the corridor and we just start to have a conversation. And it's when one of us realize, hey, we have a class or we have a meeting to head to. We head off to it, right? So we
sitting under the no sitting sign.
Yes, sitting under the no sitting sign, right? Big no sitting sign, and we sit down there holding forth, and people coming up, and the conversation just fluid because as somebody jump in and somebody jump out, that kind of thing. So, actually, before I start to ask you those questions, let me mind your business a little bit. What have you been doing? What you up to these days?
Exercising a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Getting back into proper shape. Well, that's one of my main projects. The other, I've actually taken the time to write that book people have been harassing me to write the last few years.
Good.
History of random Trinbagonian things. I actually wrote the book.
Mm-hmm.
It's actually being edited. So at some point, it will show up.
Good.
And then it will cause a backlash.
This would have been based on like the random posts you used to put up, right? Because every so often you would catch a vibes.
And just start teaching history
Yes.
randomly.
Yes. Good.
Looking at obscure things, looking at things that are misunderstood,
Good.
looking at things that are not taught properly.
Yeah.
So I've actually sat down and I wrote a history of Trinidad and Tobago that could be understood by anybody, and that deals with a lot of topics that we don't normally teach, but that we need to understand as people who are in the midst of this thing called development.
Right. So I'm telling you from
all the
now.
chapters are short. Yeah.
I'm telling you from now, once you've published the book, I want you back on here to talk about the book.
Never a problem.
Okay, good. Right. So, let's jump straight into it. And I want to jump straight into the stereotype. As a child growing up, into my adulthood, I would always hear people saying, "But you real bright girl." And there was always this kind of astonishment, right? About me being bright. And then eventually, I would have people making comments. The assumption was that I was intelligent or bright because I was mixed race. So they were attributing my intelligence to the Barrett side of my ancestry as opposed to the Williams side of my ancestry, right?
Yeah.
So the assumption was because she have Indian in she, that's why she intelligent, not because she has, she's of African descent. And of course, I would regularly, growing up, be hearing people talking about how black people had hard. Because I had a different texture here, different ethnic makeup, I would also often hear that, she different because ...
Yeah.
So,
always qualifications.
Always qualifications, right? Always these qualifications. So, I don't think that that's why I'm intelligent. But I don't want to get into why I think I'm intelligent just yet. I want you to start to break down for me why people so convinced that blackness equals dunceness, ignorance, inability to learn. Where does that come from?
There's a simple truth that if you repeat something erroneous enough times, it becomes its own truth, and then it has a sort of an avalanche and multiply effect. Now, there is a larger discussion to be had where this nonsensical stereotype is concerned. Because I could couch it in talk, in discussion about cultural superiority and cultural inferiority. I am amazed that we actually live in a time where the notion of white superiority is something discussed in the public sphere. You ever thought that you would get to that place? It was something that you talked about in hushed tones or you alluded to.
Yeah.
But it wasn't a talking point in the public sphere.
There's a brazenness now. There are things that would not have been discussed 10 years ago, 20 years, 15 years ago, 20 years ago.
Just in the open now.
All of us, it's become normative now. It's become common now. And it, to me, is almost like there's some sort of pushback taking place where people are asserting themselves in a particular way. And of course, today I was looking at this movie on Netflix called The Devil's Mistress. And it's about this woman, Lida Barova, who became the mistress of Joseph Goebbels, right?
Yeah.
And she's giving her story and explaining why she got involved with Goebbels. And that time period in history, and I mean there are other time periods in history, where people felt that it was okay to talk about race and to talk about themselves and to talk about their superiority in a particular way. And it's in a very brazen way, and to push back in a particular way. And I'm seeing it's 2021 now? We're 100 years down the line from the end of World War I. And I'm seeing the development of a particular behavior and attitude that fed into World War II.
Yeah. Now, this whole notion that history goes in cycles is a farce. But if you look at the trends, I mean, you really could be forgiven for thinking like that.
I'm not thinking that it goes in cycles, right? So don't get me wrong. I mean, I did enough history to know that it doesn't go in cycles, but I am looking at not so much a trend, but the similarity in terms of what allowed 1939 to 1945 to happen.
Circumstances on the ground are very similar to what is happening now. And that rise of authoritarianism a very similar framework. All right. So I could couch the whole thing in a larger discussion on cultural superiority imagined and cultural inferiority imagined. But we could leave that alone for a little while. Our context, in the Caribbean context, this whole discussion of the intellectual inferiority of Afrocentric people, African people, Afro-Trinidadians, Afro-Tobagonians, it is really born out of that experience on the plantation. And to be perfectly frank, if you could create a time machine and go back to Trinidad in the 1820s, Trinidad in 1815, Trinidad in 1800, and you visited a plantation, if you had the misfortune to find yourself on a plantation where enslaved Africans were toiling, you would be convinced that they were stupid because they acted stupid.
Well, why? What about their behavior? What about their behavior would point to that?
Why wouldn't you act stupid? What is the point of profit for a person of African origin who has been captured against his or her will, brought across the Atlantic, sold like chattel, treated worse than an animal? What do you gain by displaying intelligence on the plantation?
So you're saying it was a protection measure? They were doing that to
protect?
It was
resistance.
Okay.
It was resistance. There were actually people who were acting foolish in order to get out of work, obviously. Given the work regime that reigned on the plantation, there were people who behaved in a way that would suggest stupidity for more than one reason. One way to evade work. Another way, if you have intentions to deal with the master, for example. Let's say you're planning a revolt or planning to get away. Acting stupid is a good facilitator for that. Then you are constantly underestimated. You are constantly seen as less than nothing. And that allows you to create your own space within this space, which is meant to dehumanize you. So in a concrete sense, there were cases of people acting stupid for reasons that were germane to them. Now, of course, it fed into that whole racist stereotype that the master probably already possessed. So there is that. But there were people who may have portrayed a kind of stupidity for reasons that were beneficial to them. And there were many reasons to do that. Now, slave codes existed in every slave society, quote unquote. I don't like the word slave. I prefer to use the word enslaved.
Which is the word that I've been using for the entire series, enslaved.
So when I say slave, it's in inverted commas. Chacon came here in the 1780s and he passed one of these codes. My most despised historical figure in the history of this nation, Thomas Picton.
Picton.
I could go to town on Picton, you know that. We had this talk already. I could go to town and come back to Muruga on Picton. He passed one in 1800. Now these codes stated specifically what your life was supposed to be, your work regime, how much rations you got per week.
How you could dress as well.
How you could dress, what times you worked, what times you didn't work, what happened on Sunday. It tried to lay out every aspect of life.
So it policed every aspect. It policed every aspect.
Every aspect.
Okay.
Whether in concrete form it went that way is debatable, is questionable. But legislatively, the de jure situation was that every aspect of your life was policed. So, for example, it would say how much saltfish you were to get a week, how much flour, how much smoke herring, whatever. It was often the case in Trinidad and Tobago that the enslaved persons never got their rations.
Right.
The masters simply refused to pay, simply refused to distribute. I have actually documentation of Governor Ralph Woodford actually complaining that the slave masters of Trinidad are not giving the enslaved their rations.
Right.
So think of this. You're working during the crop time. Sometimes 18 hours, you're cutting cane, you're making sugar. You're being brutalized. You're not getting paid for any of this. To add insult to injury, the little pittance that you ought to get, you're not getting. Why wouldn't you try to evade as much work during the day, feigning incompetence, feigning sickness, feigning whatever? Because you have to feed yourself. On the plantation, you literally had to have a side hustle, which in the case of men and women was the provision grounds. So whenever your work regime ends the day, you have to go to the provision grounds and put in some hours of work, planting whatever, reaping whatever, tending whatever, weeding whatever, because you have to feed yourself. So Sunday, after all that work, the women go to the market and they sell and they make their little change. The men, after the provision ground works, they go out as quote unquote jobbing slaves and they make their little change because you have to feed yourself. Because even though we have this concept of slavery being this organized and orchestrated thing, it was very ad hoc in many cases. And the masters would do as little as possible and as much as they could get away with. And if they could get away with not feeding you, they would do that. So, what I'm trying to say, this whole paradigm of African people displaying a lack of intelligence, leading to this stereotype that they are less intelligent, was actually a sign of great intelligence. They understood the context within which they were situated, and like any human being, they found ways to game the system. Let me use that cliche, to game the system and to work things to whatever advantage they could get, because they were trapped in a paradigm that was meant to dehumanize and destroy them.
So playing dead to catch Kobo alive, in a sense, kind of.
Yeah. No cliche. They were intended to be and treated as if they were disposable laboring population, and they had to try whatever mechanisms they could create. One, to survive, and two, to build some kind of life for them within this paradigm.
I want to jump prior to arrival here, right? So I want to go back a little bit.
Yeah.
The Europeans would have come up with their own eugenics because there were all kinds of things that they used to support their claims that black African people were inferior and so actually needed to be enslaved. So I don't know if you want to go into some of the theories that Europeans...
It was more sinister and more dire than that. I was doing some additional research this week because every now and then something pops in the head and you just go off on a tangent.
Yeah.
So I was reading on that intersection between Christianity and enslavement. And I was actually going to do a post, and then I was like, Lovell, you make enough bacchanal. Rest that down. Drop a catch. Leave that alone. I didn't put up anything to discuss it because did I end up in a wrangle tangle?
No, man. Some days you had to choose violence. You had to choose violence. You had to choose violence some days.
Yeah, well, I have a tendency to choose it too many days. So I dropped that catch. I was a West Indian cricketer. The ball was in my hand, and I just drop it deliberately.
I hear you.
I'm sure you've heard of the Mark of Cain.
Yes.
Nonsense.
Yeah, the whole Hamitic theory, etc., etc., etc.
Well, they were literally grocery shopping for biblical explanations as to why people of African origin ought to be enslaved.
Can you, for the sake of the audience, explain to them the Hamitic theory that
well, I'll explain both.
Good.
Yeah, one of them was the Mark of Cain. So if you've ever been to Sunday school and you read those old Bible stories, you know the story of Cain. Cain was the first murderer. He murdered his brother Abel. For reasons that he could best explain. What most people don't know is the aftermath of that story, which was that God put a mark on Cain so that, because Cain left where the rest of his family was located and he went off.
The land of Nock, I believe. Yes.
And God put a mark on him so that people would know he was the first murderer, he was Cain, but that they would not kill him because there would be a dire punishment for anybody who killed him. Now, in the European imagination, that mark was, of course,
skin color.
Skin color.
Yeah.
So those who have African origin, who have the darker hues, have more melanin, that's actually the mark of Cain. So Europeans were justified in enslaving Africans because we were marked because of being punished for the original sin of our supposed forefather in the absence of any DNA test. So that was one explanation.
Right.
Then you have that whole Hamitic story. Now,
Yes.
I want to be polite and politic in a way. If you've read the story of Ham, now the Bible says one thing and there are specific interpretation. It says that
Shem, Ham, Japheth. So their father Noah. Noah drank. Noah got very drunk.
Noah was drunk.
Drunk, and he passed out in his tent.
What happens next? There is no certainty.
Right.
Those who read it mildly will say that Ham laughed at Noah in his drunkenness.
Right.
But there are those who think that Ham did something very different, which we will not discuss.
Well, my understanding is that the father was disheveled, right? So he was nude, he was naked. And,
yes, he was naked.
And the son laughed at the father's nudity. The son witnessed the father's nakedness, and he laughed at the father's nakedness. And so as a result of that, he and his offspring were cursed.
What I am saying to you is that I have heard other interpretations of that story.
Okay.
That Ham did not laugh. But we will not go down that road.
Okay.
Ham did something that was displeasing to Noah and displeasing to God.
Right.
And he was punished, and his descendants will be punished by being the hewers of wood and drawers of water in perpetuity. And once again, in the absence of no DNA tests, guess who are the descendants of Ham?
So they decided that it was black people that had to be the hewers of wood and the drawers of water.
Drawers of water, which is a nice poetic biblical code for enslavement.
Yep.
So take it either way. Either the mark of Cain, the Hamitic story. The Bible basically gave sanction for Europeans to enslave people of African origin. So it was justified by God, and God had no problem with African enslavement. It went as far as that. So all of the science, all of the pseudoscience, all of the physiognomy, I mean, literally, they had a grocery list of explanations as to why any and all of this was justified. So it basically it's a way of conveniently explaining your crime.
Yes.
Where you find explanations that predate the crime. It's an old criminal trick.
Yeah.
But basically, if you could have the sanction of the church, you were, justified in enslaving people of African origin. So, people don't understand how much of an ad hoc, but at the same time a complete system this was.
Enslavement, you mean?
Yeah. I mean, much of it was made up as they went along.
Yeah, they kind of figured things out, because after they enslaved people, they would have enslaved persons who spanned a range of craft and trade, and they would have been literate in their own language systems.
Yes.
And
competent
and skilled. And many of them were actually literate in terms of Arabic, not English. Right, because Arabic would have been the language in Africa that had a written script. So there was a language system that they were able to write and read, but they weren't allowed to learn anything when they got to the New World.
But you don't care. You want a disposable labor force. You want somebody who will come and work as hard as possible and probably be dead in a year or 2 years or 3 years. You don't care, and that kind of ignorance is dangerous also for the slave master. For example, Haiti is the quintessential example. Only quote-unquote successful slave revolt in the history of the world. One of the reasons for that is that a lot of those men who came to Haiti, the death rate was so high that Haiti or Saint-Domingue never had a Creole slave society, quote-unquote.
Right.
Basically, you have African enslaved people who are coming over rapidly, because the death rate is so high.
Yeah.
So there is no growth of a creolized enslaved society. And you have a lot of African men with military training. So after this ritual and all of that, isn't it a bit curious that they are able to organize that quickly into a structure?
Not just organize quickly, they were able to organize and keep the entire thing secret for a very long period of time. So they mobilized persons across estates.
Organized, structured, coordinated. You had a lot of military minds on those plantations. But when you come as an enslaved person, nobody doing an interview. What was your job before?
Right.
Nobody's doing that.
No. And for me, one of the things that struck me about the Haitian uprising, the Haitian Revolution, was that the coordinators understood that there were a number of ways to bind persons together from different ethnic groups, because they weren't all from the same ethnic group, right? No. So they used ritual practice to bind ritual practice to bind everybody, bind people together.
But there was also military training and military education.
Yes, yeah, I'm not doubting, not denying any of that at all. But there's always the emotional aspect of things. Yes, so you're militarily trained, but you also have to find those emotional responses. You have to tap into those emotional responses to get
ritual legitimizes you.
Yes. Legitimizes you. Yes, it does.
So you have a situation where every so-called slave code as well makes it illegal to educate your enslaved persons. Many of them, the penalty was death.
Yeah.
And if you understand the history of Toussaint Louverture, you see the wisdom in that macabre kind of thing. Because a little education made those enslaved people tremendously powerful and also tremendously dangerous. So what happens in the immediate post-emancipation scenario? You have these people who have been castigated, stigmatized as being uneducated, stupid, unintelligent. You can't educate them. In the case of Trinidad, something very spectacular happens that we don't really give enough significance to.
What is that?
Typical enslaved person leaves the plantation illiterate in English. Yes, many of them might have been literate in Arabic. Many of them might have been versed in oral traditions, but they would have been illiterate in English, French, and Spanish, which were the major languages taught. Make the lingua franca in Trinidad, major languages.
Yes.
Particularly French and English, which was the
thereafter. So French first and subsequently English.
So you have people who leave the plantation and they are illiterate, quote unquote, in English, French, Spanish. And within a generation, you have people who could not read. I use a very simple aphorism. People who could not read, producing children and grandchildren who could read in no time. And we were talking, when we discussed having this discussion earlier this week, I mentioned fraudacity to you.
Yes.
I was actually reading J.J. Thomas's Fraudacity. It is the best example of fancy language to answer stupidness.
I think explain to the audience what is fraudacity and who is J.J. Thomas.
Right. So this English writer, Anthony Froude, comes to the Caribbean. He does a tour of the Caribbean. And he's looking in particular at the state of the quote-unquote Negro in the Caribbean. And he writes his book on this journey he's been through, talking about the dire state of the Negro and there's no development and they're going nowhere. Like basically the Negroes are condign and benighted people. J.J. Thomas, Trinidad intellectual extraordinaire, writes a book in response to that nonsense, which he calls fraudacity. And listen, the man went to town, came back to the country, took the dictionary, boiled it, and distilled the biggest words and slapped this Englishman with it. I was reading this book and saying they were calling me to write. I couldn't use the kind of words this man was using. I mean, literally to slap this Englishman.
Yeah.
Because there was a remarkable educational expansion in Trinidad in the post-emancipation period. It was driven by people who had been denied the right to education on the plantation, and they were adamant that their children and their grandchildren would receive whatever kind of schooling was available.
One of the things that I pointed out... One of the things I pointed out to the audience on, it might have been Sunday. Today is Friday, right? So it might have been Sunday. I pointed this out to them. I was talking about what happened right after emancipation in terms of land and land use. And I did indicate to them that one of the critical things that took place is that children under the age of 10 from 1838, their parents did not allow them to work at all. They were all going to school, and there was a lot of
Yes,
pride. There was a lot of pride being taken in their learning to read and write by their parents.
It was a huge thing. It was a driving desire to provide for your children something that had been denied to you. So, whereas it was the norm to have children working all over the world, child labor was a normative thing. In the Caribbean, in Trinidad and Tobago, these formerly enslaved people were adamant that their children would not work and that they would go to school. And they were adamant that they would go to school even with people they knew didn't like them. Because we end up with this dual system in Trinidad because the state and the Catholic Church end up in a cultural civil war.
Explain that cultural civil war, please. I think people need to understand that cultural civil war.
Right. So Trinidad was a Spanish colony, but after the schedule of population, its elite was French Creole. So you had French Creole culture, Spanish government, Spanish law, both Catholic, basically in sync. 1797, the English come and they take over. The English take over a colony where the laws are Spanish, but the ruling class is French, and the English and French were enemies. This was in the midst of the Napoleonic War with England. Well, they call them after the worst of allies. In that time, it was pure hate and acting normal. England and France are enemies. So you have this English colony that is a titular Spanish colony, but the ruling class is French. And the French are Catholic, and they are adamant that the society must have a Francophone culture, and the English come and they want to have an Anglophone culture. And both of these groups go to war. And one of the places this war is played out is in governance, but the real place where it is really played out is in education. And if you know the history of this country, so you know what? We are French Creole, we are Catholic, we are going to build St. Mary's College. We are English, we are Anglican, we are going to build Queen's Royal
QRC.
We are French, we are Catholic, we are going to open primary schools. We are English, we are Anglican, we are going to open primary schools. The government is English. Lord Harris, he opens ward schools, but the schools are state schools, but they are secured to whom? English. So you have competing religions, competing elites, so to speak, fighting out a cultural war in education. And in the middle of this are people of African origin who are well aware that neither side likes them, because the Catholic Church had no room or place for black people. The Anglican Church had no room or place for black people.
It was not
open. It was
openly racist, openly segregated.
Open segregation, open racism. But you know what? In the midst of their fighting each other, they are providing schooling, and we are going to access this schooling.
Yeah.
So the civil war in Trinidad between the English, who are the colonial masters, and the French, who are the social masters, basically, provides an education space for people of African origin to access almost universal primary schooling. So, out of their conflict, education becomes, primary schooling at least becomes normative. Secondary schooling is still for the elite and the well-to-do.
Because secondary schooling you still have to pay for. Primary school was on offer from the missionaries, right? Whether it was Anglican or Catholic.
It was really meant to ensure that we have more people than you in the war.
Yes.
Basically.
Yes.
Because the idea was that we will indoctrinate you and you will go home and indoctrinate your parents. But because of that drive of the formerly enslaved to educate themselves, this provides an ideal opportunity. And as I said, whereas in the rest of the world, even in England, child labor is normative, in the Caribbean, in Trinidad and Tobago, those children are going to primary school and getting a
Yes.
primary school education. So I'll go back to the cliche I used before. People who could not read were very quickly producing people who could read. And if you think about it, it might not sound remarkable. It is very,
Of course, it is
very
remarkable, because how do
It
you
is
go from
remarkable.
centuries of being considered black and stupid and incapable of reading and writing to within in less than a generation, because it's not a whole generation, less than a generation, you can read and write. Yeah.
Producing literate people who can write Fraudacity.
Yes.
I should really take a look at that book. I learned some words.
I
have to tell you
have
something.
I have fraud. I mean, I've read. I know Fraudacity. I've read Fraudacity. You can't have passed through UE in our time and escaped
Without
yes,
reading.
escaped
Yeah.
and avoided Fraudacity. So we at the point now, post emancipation, black formerly enslaved persons, emancipated Africans are taking advantage of the education system. Were they
Yeah.
getting into secondary school? Were they going on to secondary school?
Very few. Now, I don't know if you remember, one of my early jobs in UE was an oral history project called Voices of the Past,
Yes.
where I would go around interviewing people about their lives. It was really to capture the history, an oral history of life in Trinidad and Tobago up to 1950.
Right.
So I had to interview people who were 70 plus, who had lived at that time, or would have been young adults or teens at that time, and to find out what their life was.
Right.
The numbers were very small in terms of people attending secondary school. But primary schooling back then was very different. You literally could leave primary school with a very thorough education. And I'm telling you, I went around interviewing people. I think in 2 years, I interviewed probably like 80, 90 people, all ethnic groups, both genders. And if I recall from that number, maybe two or three would have attended secondary school, but you would not know it from conversing with them.
No, you wouldn't.
I remember talking to
I have an
I remember
uncle.
talking to a gentleman who was a police officer.
How old was
with
he then?
education. He would have been in his 80s.
Right.
And this man is schooling me on the types of pronouns, demonstrative pronouns, and interrogative. I was like, I
It's
don't remember this.
an entirely different education system, because I've got an uncle who is now 80, 81, somewhere thereabouts, and he would have gone through. He didn't do secondary school. He did primary school and then became like a post-primary teacher, post-primary monitor kind of thing. So you
Monitor,
know
yeah.
how that went, right? Where you
Yeah.
did all of primary school and then you did like an extra year, so like a standard 6 or something like that. So and then you became a school monitor and you were part of the teaching staff in a school
And
system.
producing excellent teachers.
Yeah.
You could leave primary school with, I mean, I don't want to say a thorough education or a full education, but
A rounded,
quality
a
education.
quality rounded education.
Quality,
Yeah.
well-rounded education. And if you, I mean, that generation is dying out, and I'm not sure if we're making the best use of them in terms of the knowledge that they have before they go. But you talk with them. Sometimes I would put them above the students I taught anyway in terms of education. I mean, literally, you could leave primary school with a really functional education. Now, my mother would have been in that whole milieu. She would have done government exhibition, which was the precursor to common entrance, and she actually passed on her prima girls, which coming from Muruga was unheard of at that time. But because the secondary schools were paid schools, they were only located in the urban areas. And if you're from the bush in Muruga, where there are probably 1 or 2 cars on the road, literally, you have no chance of attending secondary school. So she never attended secondary school.
Unless she would have been fortunate, like say, I don't know if you know the story of Professor Ken Ramchan, when he passed for, I think, Naprima Boys, and what happened, and he was from Bonas village down Cedros side, and what had to happen is he left Bonas village to go and live by family in San Fernando. And he
You have to do
talked
that.
right, and he talked about how he was
But you
treated
also
almost
have
like a
to have the money
servant.
to pay the fees.
Yeah, yes.
Also have to have money to- and if
But
you
he got
didn't
a
have-
scholarship, I think.
Yeah, and those would have been
Few and far between.
those government exhibition scholarships would have been 5 for the entire population.
Yes.
So not to be like a Williams absolutely brilliant, or you had to be well-to-do, or secondary school was a pipe dream. You had no chance of attending.
Yeah, because
So
school fees,
in
and
my
the school
family,
fees were beyond the
or
means of the
beyond.
average person.
Yeah, I mean, if you are at that state, that level where, I mean, just putting food on the table is a struggle,
Yeah.
as it would have been for most colonial families. If you've ever read any part of the Morning Report, it
Yes.
really annoys me to see well-to-do people, to hear well-to-do people today talking about sufferation and starvation when they have no idea what those words mean.
Yeah. They don't know
But
what people were living on at that point in time.
they don't know. Listen, when for the Moyne Commission, which was a royal commission sent here in the wake of the 1937 riots, that people in the Caribbean were starving. For them to say that people in Trinidad and Tobago were starving, which directly correlates to the fact that colonialism was an exploitative system. That was a really hard admission for an English commission to make.
But you know,
But
love.
the evidence was so stark
Yeah.
that they couldn't avoid stating the simple truth.
Well, Lovell, the thing that irritates me, right, is you're talking about the Moyne Commission, which would have been
Yeah.
1937, somewhere thereabouts, right?
1937, yeah.
And
Yeah.
then there's the Wood Commission that would have been, 2 decades before, something like that. So, right? Wood Commission comes here, both of them royal commissions. They come here and establish much the same thing, just like 2 decades apart from each other. There is, rank poverty. Wages are ridiculous. There's a lot of
Yeah.
inequity in the society, and you need to ease things up, free things up, and it's almost like
Think about that. A royal commission coming to a colony and saying that colonialism has you in starvation.
yeah.
Think about it.
But as you, and that
This would not be something they would have wanted to admit, but
Of
the
course
circumstances
not.
were so dire,
Uh-huh.
they had no choice.
no, and you also, I mean, it's an indictment on the colonial system,
Yeah, it is.
because the
And they
colonial,
didn't come to do that. They came to gloss things over.
of course,
But
because
the circumstances that they met were so fundamentally dire that all of that fell apart.
and I guess it would also have been stark when you consider that whole swathes of society in the United Kingdom would have gotten wealthy off the Caribbean.
Yeah.
Right? And there would have been all of this talk about, what wealth means if you are a plantation owner in Jamaica or a plantation owner in Trinidad. And by the 1920s, we would have still had really high cocoa prices, etc. So you're there thinking to yourself, this commission arrives here in the aftermath of a period where there would have been vast amounts of wealth and the working class living like real catchers.
Literally starvation wages. Wages were paid to you with which you would starve, you would suffer. Not some imaginary thing that we hype up now. Literally, people were starving.
So the empire was not looking good at all.
So even in their own eyes, even their public servants, even the white men came here in black suits, basically to do a con job, to gloss everything over, had to admit that colonialism had people here starving.
Well, I need to let people know the context of both commissions. The Wood Commission came here because 1917, there were riots in Port of Spain. Right?
Yeah.
And that's because people, West Indians that served in the war, were now back home. And having served in World War I, and they realized the degree of inequity and the amount of racism that was taking place, they became very restive, and they also owed money. They were owed money, not so?
Let me tell you something about that. They mutinied in Italy.
Yeah.
Now, they went to fight. They got caught up in this whole propaganda, king and country.
Right.
And they signed up to fight. When they got there, nobody wanted them. And then the white officers from the Caribbean thought that they would have a kind of a plantation kind of mentality on the basis. So they literally wanted to be whipping people.
Yes.
It wasn't a good idea. Because the men who left, by the time they got there and they realized the circumstances, they changed. And when they came back, they were changed. Listen, those guys mutinied in Italy. They were arrested. They were brought back to England. When they reached England, I don't know what happened. Some American soldiers, racist abuse, they beat them up. Some English citizens, racist abuse, they beat them up. So English soldiers challenged them, they beat them up.
And when they came,
they literally sent back those West Indian soldiers. Each man had his own personal armed guard. So there wasn't a case where you have like 100 soldiers with 10 guards. If you have 100 soldiers, you have 100 guards. Because they caused so much bacchanal on the way back. When they reached in the Caribbean, the idea was to jail them. The public in Trinidad and Tobago started to agitate so much that the British dropped the charges and freed them.
Yeah.
And those guys were basically waiting for a fight.
Pretty much. And they were very, 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 very restive. Because I mean, I know when some of what I've read is when they got back here, there was a lot of fighting and brawling that took place.
The word the colonial office used to love to use for this kind of thing is agitated.
Yes.
They were agitated and they were agitated. And there was a dock workers strike and those soldiers came out and the port had to pay higher wages to the workers, 25% higher, and they started agitating. Now, there is historical evidence that they formed a secret society. The name escapes me right now. Before they got back to the Caribbean, and they planned to have a series of revolts in every major British West Indian colony. There's evidence that they actually, all of the highest rank you could reach as a
that
West Indian.
Part I did not know about. I did not know that they planned to have a series of revolts.
I'll get the name and I'll WhatsApp it to you.
Please.
The highest rank you could reach in the West India Regiment as a colored soldier was sergeant. All of the sergeants sat down and they formed a secret society. And one of them was butler. And they made a plan to have a series of revolts to challenge British colonialism in every major British colony.
Because the thing that I'd heard, and I'm subject to correction, is those guys got back here and they were still waiting on payment from having served abroad. They didn't get theirs.
Everybody else got a pay raise except them.
Except them.
That is what triggered the mutiny.
Yeah, because I heard
They were the only members of the armed forces not to get that increase.
Right, because I heard the white West Indians.
They were owed money.
The white West Indians got paid. So, and I mean, like Arthur Cipriani would have been one of those white West Indians who served.
But he was the only one they liked.
Yeah, he was the only one. The only one they liked. But the white,
he would be their lawyer in the court martials.
Yeah,
they were always being court martials, and he was the one white officer who would actually defend them during the court martials.
Right.
So that's why he has this cachet with the TWA when he gets back.
Yeah,
he has the respect. He's the only guy who has the respect of the men.
Yeah. So
I've always wondered how it is.
Yeah.
If it is just coincidence that you have all of these revolts in that 1937 to 39.
No, it's not coincidence because it's coordinated. And so 1917. So Woods, the thing in the uprising in 1917 is as a result of post World War II. Then by 1937, when the Moyne Commission happens on the heels of the riots, the labor riots that took place throughout the Caribbean, right?
Yeah. Not a coincidence.
Not a coincidence at all.
Not a coincidence. So, strategic, planned, implemented, not a coincidence.
Not a coincidence.
And every society has the same thing. But there is also the same problem in every society, British colonialism.
Yes.
And the thing about colonialism is that it does not concern itself with the circumstances of the people. Tobago was, up until the early 19th century, a very rich colony. They were fighting like Tobago over cats and dogs when nobody cared about Trinidad. Everybody fighting over Tobago. Tobago, a rocky island where, large-scale agriculture is always going to be marginal, but sugar prices were so high that they were fighting over Tobago.
Yeah.
And so that collapsed. They couldn't care less.
They couldn't care less. It was
put Tobago with Grenada.
Put Tobago with Grenada. Put Tobago with Barbados. Put Tobago with St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Put Tobago with Trinidad. They couldn't care less. They really couldn't care less.
This was a colony that made you millions. And things turned around and they just toss it from here to there. Like, you know,
I want
all
to,
underwear.
I want to reinforce the idea that, I mean, the point that you made early on about how extractive the British colonial system was. Well, I mean the entire enslavement system. That
Yeah.
the Moyne Commission would get here, knowing how much wealth was pulled out of the Caribbean and seeing that the Caribbean was on the verge of economic collapse, poverty,
Yes.
right? And
Yeah.
by the
But that
1937, Britain is looking to head into war in Europe. So they don't have resources to really pour into the Caribbean in any way.
and they even if they had, they would not care.
No, they wouldn't.
Colonialism is about exploitation. It's not a side effect. It is the main ethos.
Yeah.
It is about exploitation. In fact, it is about choking out your eye and then telling you you should enjoy it. That is colonialism.
Yeah. Well, I want to pull it back into education. The
We kind of went
education.
off on a tangent there.
Yes, we did. All right, then two commissions get we tied up. So we're getting close to heading towards independence now. You have persons like Williams who would have gone abroad, studied. I mean, he's back here. He's pushing a particular movement.
And Trinidadians don't understand how significant he was in the broader context of education.
But perhaps you want to
William was the
explain to
first
them his significance from the broader context, because
We think of Eric Williams as Prime Minister, politician, PNM. The rest of the world thinks of Eric Williams as the guy who unmasked the hypocrisy of British colonial history.
one of the
The
key
first
players in
guy to
Pan-Africanism.
literally tell them that they were writing nonsense,
Yeah.
that they were hypocrites, that this emancipation thing had nothing to do with Christian values and this sense of British superiority and British generosity. It had to do with money.
It was money, just money.
It was money.
Capitalism and slavery rocked the world,
was
and I don't
money.
think people realize how much of an impact
no.
capitalism and slavery had. Capitalism and slavery,
changed.
for the audience, I need to let the audience know, capitalism and slavery was his PhD thesis that was made into a book afterwards.
Yeah.
And capitalism and slavery is so huge that there's a lot of work happening coming out of the United States now, where they are only now beginning to look at the impact of enslavement on the enrichment of the United States, and they are using Dr. Eric Williams's Capitalism and Slavery as source material.
There is active debate on that book today.
Today,
Almost 100 years after it was conceptualized.
you know
There
that
there is an ongoing debate today.
there are a couple two things I want to tell you here. There's a museum in the United States. The last museum that they would have put up in the Smithsonian, which is the African American Experience, right? The African American Cultural Museum. I visited that museum in 2019, and when I visited the museum in 2019, Eric Williams features in some of their displays. Because when they get to the point where they, in the 20th century, when they start to talk about the cost of enslavement and what a slave was worth in terms of what the kind of wealth you earned off of a black human body, they were using Williams's research to be able to establish things. You go down in the bookshop of the museum, and capitalism and slavery featuring in the bookshop in the museum.
British history, British historians, British historiography, all of them are still trying to respond to this man who's been dead since 1981. They're still fighting that fight today and not winning.
No, capitalism and slavery
and
is
forget
mind-blowing. It's mind-blowing.
And forget them. He changed Caribbean history.
Yes, he did.
There is no modern Caribbean history without Williams.
No, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right.
There is no modern Caribbean-centric history without Williams.
So that's why I wanted you to get the audience to understand it, because you're right. A lot of people only think of Williams as the former Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago who died. But long before he was a Prime Minister, he was shaking, world famous intellectual, shaking up the world. Him and CLR James.
If there is a canon of the greatest books written, not even saying the greatest history books, the greatest books written, capitalism and slavery ends up in that canon.
Yeah, agree.
I am not saying that. The world of history.
No, other persons are saying that. Capitalism and the book is
very few people get to write a book that is a watershed event. Think about it. Very few people get to write a book that makes history, that is a watershed event.
Yeah.
He changed Caribbean history.
Yes.
He put British history on the back foot. And they're still taking bouncers.
Yeah.
And the man is 1981.
And to me, when we started this conversation this evening, we were talking about the kinds of conversations we're hearing now that we didn't think 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago would be out in the public domain. White superiority, etc., etc. And to me, books like Capitalism and Slavery are important for pushing back at that narrative of white superiority.
Laid the foundation for doing it.
Yep.
He laid the foundation for doing it in our Caribbean context.
Yeah.
And he also did something also that doesn't appear to be spectacular, but was. The colonial system of education that we inherited, and this is something that people need to understand, it was not meant to be transformative. It was not meant to promote social mobility.
Can you slow it down and explain what you mean by that, please? I want people to understand what you mean.
We think of education as an emancipatory process.
Yeah.
You get educated and it comes with a better life, it comes with a better job, it comes with a sense of identity that is enhanced, it comes with improved circumstances. That is how we conceive of education in our modern Caribbean context. None of that was by intention. The education system that we inherited was the one that was created for the lower classes in England by a gentleman named Sir Robert Peel, who also created the police system in England. And I could make correlations there that are dire, but I will not. I will simply say that there were two forms of education in England. There was education for the social betters, and then there was education for the quote-unquote masses, which is a word I hate very much. And education for the masses was just educating you enough to know your place and to stay there. You were not meant to challenge the social hierarchy. You were not meant to better yourself. You were not meant to have a better life. You were educated to accept your status and to stay there. And that's the system that was implemented here. We took that system, which was meant to be static, which was meant to be discriminatory, which was meant to be racist, and we made that system into one that does all the things that we conceive of today. We transformed the colonial education system into a developmental education system for an independent country. And we did it in no time.
I want you to explain to the audience, because I am aware of it. You are aware of it. They're not aware of it. The fight that went down between Williams and Dom Basil of the of Mount St. Benedict, the Catholic Church, where he wanted to free up the education system.
Yes, he wanted secondary schooling. He wanted schooling to be open to other ethnicities. He wanted other groups to get involved. And the church was adamant that they should be the ones in charge of the system. So what he did was to create a truce. We know that truce as the Concordat.
The Concordat, yes.
It was really a truce in a war between the church and the state, because Williams needed the church's involvement because of its historical impact on education. He needed to come to some agreement with them. So, like Napoleon, who had a Concordat in his time, he created a peace treaty. And that's what the Concordat is. It is a peace treaty
between the church and the state.
Church and the state, which would allow him the space to expand education to the masses, quote unquote, to expand the secondary schooling, to allow other ethnicities to get involved in as denominational boards and not just Catholic Church. He wanted to create a space for all of that. So he had to come to peace, had to create a peace, an armistice between the church and the state, and that is what we call the Concordat today. It was really to get the church on board with this whole national education system for everybody. education that was no longer exclusive, but would get everybody else involved.
Yes, state funded
a
education. Because
It was a fight.
up to that point, there was the secondary education system was still mostly private, right? Not entirely private, but mostly private. Okay.
Yeah. You'd have had one or two quote unquote model schools,
Right.
but it was mostly private.
Mostly private.
So to expand the education system, to make secondary school available to the common man and woman, you had to come to an agreement with the church. You didn't have a choice.
Yep. Yeah.
But the larger point is that we managed to take a system that was meant to keep us in our place and make it one that would send us to every place. And we did that in no time. Now, I am not going to sit here as someone who has been in education all of my adult life, as someone who used to be a minister in the ministry, and say that the system is perfect. It is not.
What are the things you would like to see be done differently about the system?
We did that transformation and made it something that worked for us and that works for us. But to get where we need to go as a society, we need a different kind of system. Our system does not, let me use a rude analogy. We produce too many sheep, not enough goats.
Right.
We end up being goats maybe by accident of our parentage, accident of our home circumstances.
Yeah.
But it produces too many sheep.
Yeah, and
we need more,
I agree with you.
We need more obstructionists. We need more creative people. We need more people with imagination. We need more troublemakers. We need more people who ask questions. We need people who accept things less. I really, really hated attending those award ceremonies that we have with the top 100 for SEA. I really hated it. But I would go because I thought the children, if they worked hard, deserved to have both of us, myself and Minister Garcia, say something to them. And I said the same thing every year. You have the right to have an outrageous dream. You have the right to dream big. You have the right to have a ridiculous concept in your head as to what you want to be. You have the right to be a Trinidadian student and say, I want to be an astronaut, even though that's ridiculous.
What?
Because if our best and brightest students only see being a doctor and being a lawyer as the pinnacle of what they can be, then our system is far too colonial still.
Of course, it's far too colonial still. Now,
yeah, I know that.
I
was trying to convince them to have a bigger imagination.
Because the decolonization hasn't ended. We are still trying to decolonize.
It's a process.
Yeah,
it's a process.
It's a process.
But I was fast and I was a place as usual and trying to kind of fast forward the process, but trying to get them to understand that imagination and creativity are not exclusive from education.
No, it's not exclusive. It's not exclusive from education. But I feel as if part of the problem here, I mean, it might be regionally, but let me talk about Trinidad and Tobago. Part of the problem here is that the employment sector, which is the next stage once you're done with education, because people educate themselves for the most part to get a job. There's not very many persons who idle like me and you. I don't have plenty people who idle like me and you, Lovell, who went to university. Who decide we're going to do this degree because we like it, right? We're interested. We want to learn things. Many persons educate themselves to get a job, and the kinds of jobs that we have available within this space are limited.
Let me tell you something that you don't know. A secret that you don't know. And I probably shouldn't say this, but I'm fast. You might not be aware that and I was talking about this just the other day. There is a division in the Ministry of Education that does job projections. Right. Basically, they produce data on what future jobs will be. I didn't even know this division existed. It with a long obscure name. Right. And I actually met the gentleman in charge, a very nice, unassuming guy, but very, very brilliant guy. Probably 3 years into my being there.
And what are they projecting at the jobs?
Research, concrete and otherwise, and they come up with this huge manual that says, in the next 10 years, these will be the jobs. And they produce gold standard data. So much so that the CSO uses their data.
Okay.
That's the quality of the data that they produce.
So what are
And
the jobs?
yeah, tech work areas.
I'm not surprised to hear that. I am not surprised to hear that.
Everything, all of their research, and this is backed up by what comes out of planning and even things I was seeing from the Ministry of Labor, says that the areas of growth in our economy and areas of growth that should be in our economy are in particular in the technical vocational areas.
Plumbing,
The areas
welding.
where we have been telling people for generations that if they're doing this, they're done. See, we've been telling students that if you want to work with your hands, it's because you're done.
Listen.
And we've come to the point where
Lovell, we had whole technical institutes here that we have semi-phased out. John D. and Sando Tech. I mean...
And we need them.
Yes, we do.
Trinidad, let me give you something. We have a problem in this country making furniture because we have no joiners. We have to import joiners from Guyana. And I know that because there were people in the constituency of Muruga Tablan who were making furniture and they could not find skilled people to make the furniture. They had to import labor. We don't produce joiners. And there are a lot of other technical and vocational areas that we need now, that as our economy evolves, we will need more and more that we have not produced, that we are not producing, and then we stigmatize the thing to tell people that they don't see if they're doing this.
Exactly, they dance, their education levels are low, their IQ levels are low because you're doing tech work subjects.
Send them to do a trade. Send them to do a... We've convinced them that they dance. We've convinced them that they have no value. And that's what we need.
Worse than that.
All the major areas of growth are technical and vocational areas.
Worse than that. We have sent persons to do trade, stigmatized the trade, and while we may have taught them how to do the trade, we didn't teach them how to turn the trade into a business.
Listen, it's worse than that. There is no articulation. If I didn't want to do a PhD in history, I just have no ambition. So I ended up with a PhD in history. But I knew how to get there. There is a pathway drawn out for me, wide like the highway, and you just walk on it and you get there. If you want to be a welder in this country, what's the process? You know?
I know, but that's because I worked in a secondary school. That's because I worked in a secondary school.
Is it clearly demarked?
No, it's not. It's not clearly demarked.
One of the things I was interested in doing was to draw up that articulation. But such has been our distaste for working with your hands.
Yes.
That we've undermined that whole area of our education. And it turns out that's what we need more than anything else. And it turns out that in this area, despite our adhocracy, we still produce world-class people.
Yeah.
If you look at the global oil industry and you talk to people who know oil, if you want to drill for oil, you go and get a trainee. We are world-class at drilling for oil. And I'm telling you that because I have friends who have more ambition and sense than me, and they went to technical school when I was going to UAE. And they came up with something that will get them a barrel full of money. But we still tell them that they dance. When they get their paycheck, I ask them, where's all them numbers? They say that's called money. You wouldn't know anything about that.
You wouldn't know about that.
You wouldn't know about that. That's called money. And we telling them that they dance. But they laughing all the way to the bank. And we with our nice grammar school degrees getting, paid in love, I suppose, at times.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the for me the critical things, that the grammar school education system pretty much trains you to become a clerk, to fit in a box, and tech voc education actually trains you to think outside the box and to do things, to dream, to design, to develop things, and I think everybody needs to have a skill like that.
We need more. Take it from me. And I have not seen, I'm not there to see the new documentation of what will come out next, but I know what it will say. We need to focus on technical vocational education yesterday.
Well,
Not today.
when
Yesterday.
a couple of weeks ago, or actually maybe as much as a month and a half ago, I would have had the current minister of education here, and she was saying something similar. That tech work is the next area that they're going to be
Because
pushing.
she is probably seeing the same data.
Yes.
I told you the Ministry of Education is a very, very interesting place. But there's a division there that produces gold star information. The CSO just takes it because it is of such high quality. And
Yeah.
it says that our education system needs to orient quite a bit more to technical and vocational education. But we need, I put up a post a few weeks ago talking about the flaws in the system.
Yeah.
And for me, the same problem I had with UWI, and we've had this discussion many times.
Yeah.
Our system is just too conservative.
Very
It is
conservative.
too conservative.
And this
Our education system needs to become
more experimental, more dynamic and more experimental.
more dynamic, more imaginative, more experimental,
So this
too
feeds
conservative.
this feeds into what I avoided saying at the start when we were talking about what makes us different, right? And not different.
Idle poor.
Right, idle, right, exactly, idle poor. But what I'm going to say is this: there are certain conditions that you require, that you need to become, I would say, learned. I don't want to say to become educated, right? Because it's very easy to become educated. You enroll the child in a school and let the child move through the school system, and you become educated.
Yeah.
But all of the brightness and the intelligence that people will remark upon, where myself and yourself, persons like myself and yourself are concerned, happens as a result of households that allowed you to dare to be different and to think different and to do differently. So I had a mother who, she realized I like to read. She just bought books. All the time. Up to now, I don't think my mother was aware half of what I was reading, like unaware. I would just say to her, Mommy, I want this. Mommy, you could buy this for me. She would buy it. And I would have all the time in the world to read and browse, all the time sometimes to the detriment of my housework, and then I would get, a sound buffing and a cocktail, and I'd have to, but as soon as I could, I was back reading, and I had way less screen time. Television was a very, very, very rare thing. When I say rare, there's a TV in the house, yes, but you wasn't watching TV whole day. You wasn't in front of a phone or an iPad or whatever it is. No, exactly. TV was not that interesting.
It was not interesting. It wasn't interesting.
Today, I was sitting down thinking about that. I'm thinking to myself, movies and television shows back then did not have the degree of digitization that they have now. So your imagination was far more interesting than anything you could have possibly seen on television.
I looked at a movie the other night, and I said that this movie only makes sense if everybody in the world is an idiot. The only way.
What movie was that? What movie was that?
Netflix, Fatal. Look at that movie, Fatal.
Okay.
It only makes sense if everybody's an imbecile. In the movie. That's the only way the movie makes sense. But in your book, a book fired the imagination.
A book fired the imagination, and you read a lot. I was also one of those persons that did a lot of writing and just did a lot of exploring. Oh, tons of inappropriate questions. And this is where my father came in. So mommy was the buy whatever it is she want to read because it will keep she quiet. Daddy was the engager in whatever conversation she wants to be engaged in. Mm-hmm. So he's very accustomed to me just starting very random conversations with him, and we just go wherever it is the conversation is going.
My parents never attended secondary school, but education was a big deal to them.
Yeah.
So they had these three boys who were very unusual in three very different ways. And if you came to our house as children and you listened to us talk, you would wonder what is wrong with these children? Talking about all kind of things. Talking about Cold War and World War II and politics as little children.
Yeah.
Adults would come and marvel at us.
My dad
But
was...
We were encouraged to discuss whatever.
My dad was giving me a story the other day. I mean, he remembered it way better than I remember it. Where he said, I was about 8 or 9. And the adults were sitting on the front porch and they were having a conversation about politics. And he said, Rhoda, you were in the middle of the conversation and you were part of the conversation. And you're basically saying to us, don't worry, I understand what it is I'm talking about. I understand what it is I'm saying. And he said, you've always ever been like that. That's the sort of child you have been. But it didn't happen. It doesn't happen in a vacuum. And that's the point I want the audience to get.
To me, that was normal. To you,
that
was normal.
Of course.
But
and
our upbringings were not normal.
Right. Okay. So our upbringings, Lovell, would have been atypical. But the point that I'm trying to make is that it is very possible to create the environment that creates these atypicals.
Yes.
Right? It's very possible to create that environment. And it starts with reading and discussion.
Education works best when you have the home, the school, parents, children on the same page.
Yeah.
If anything is missing, it doesn't work in the same way.
But you also need time. And I want to make that point. You need time. There's a way in which 20th century, 21st century life has gotten to be so fast-paced, certainly in the last 3 decades or so incredibly fast-paced, that people don't have that kind of breathing room in between. The way in which I remember people having gaps in their days, Lovell, where they're sitting down whether it's in their living room or their front porch or in their yard, wherever, and having those exchanges.
It's ironic.
And having the time to read.
In our day, education was harder to come. Information was harder to come by.
Much harder to come by. Now you're getting information being thrown at you too quickly. I agree with you. Too quickly.
And there is no filter. In our day, there were inbuilt filters in terms of quality. There's no filter now.
There's no filter now. But
so you're not sure exactly what you're getting.
You're not sure what you get. But the other thing is, people no longer either have the time or make the time to digest information. Lovell, you and I read books, We don't skim it, we don't scan it, we read books. And sometimes we just read it again and again and again. And after we've read a book, we will have a conversation about it. Or we will say, I was reading this book the other day, or I was looking at this the other day, and we'd have a conversation, and that reinforces ideas, one, and it also allows you to explore ideas. You and I, for the last hour and 18 minutes,
really?
Yes, right? For the last hour and 18 minutes, we are tossing around ideas from books that we have both read, independent of each other, but over our lifetime.
Besides just interest?
Just interest.
It wasn't a test, it wasn't a quiz.
No, just interest. Yeah. We playing with an idea, we toying with an idea, we shoot in the breeze. Like this whole business of these men who came back after World War I and caused plenty ruckus in the place, right? And the fact that they would have organized to cause 1937 over a span of time. Yeah. And all I'm saying is the way in which the time period we grew up in afforded we would not have seen it as luxuries then, but it's a luxury now when I look back. It afforded us multiple luxuries. Books or access to information that was filtered, right? And had standard state. So information that was filtered, information that had standards built into it. And the time, Lovell, time to do the reading and to do the conversating.
I agree. Time and the interest.
The time and interest, yeah.
Yeah.
Because for me, one of my, well, I can't say challenges, because I've been very good about curating my circle, right? I curate, when I say curate, I'm very particular about who I'm talking to and conversing with on a regular basis. But there are lots of persons that don't have let me say the privilege that I have, where the kinds of people I want to be able to talk to, I can reach out and talk to them. If I want to talk about fraudacity, you on my phone, I could WhatsApp you, hey, Lovell, blah, 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 you know, and we could shoot the breeze on an idea.
When you use a sci-fi term, you have your own second foundation.
I have my own second foundation. I do. And that is, it is so critical to have the time, to have access to reliable information. And it's not that there isn't reliable information out there right now. But I think there's also so much that is battling for people's attention.
Yeah.
You know?
I mean, it could be that 30 years ago, everybody was watching the Cosby Show. I mean, a bad analogy, but everybody was watching the Cosby Show at the same time.
Yeah.
And are you going down that road?
No, let's not go down that road, but let's go down the road of one television station. And when you have one television station and everybody looking at the same thing at the same time, you're having the same experience. And then afterwards, you are all having the same discussion. Right? And you have multiple people in a position to have the same discussion. You looked at Fatal, on Netflix. I haven't looked at it yet, so we can't have that conversation.
Yeah, you'll have a laugh.
No, I feel I'm not going to watch it. That's what I think.
It's so huge that in that script you could drive a truck through.
Listen, there was a series I looked at a week ago or something, and that's so-called Sex Life. So it's sex /life, right? Here now, Lovell. You ever? It is for me the TV equivalent or the movie equivalent of watching a train wreck, because I couldn't look away. I just couldn't.
The worst kind of slow train wreck. Train wreck should be quick. A slow train wreck.
So yeah, I hear you on that. Yeah. I can't say anything at this point,
but I don't have all the answers on this. I don't know. I don't know how we slow time for students.
No, we can't slow time, but you know what we can do? We can encourage people to think about how they can slow things down for themselves and how they can take time for themselves.
Put down your phone.
Yeah.
Put down the phone.
I put my phone down for stretches of time.
Down the phone.
Yeah.
Life will continue without it.
Yeah, it will.
And Apple never take it up.
So, you know, one of the things that has worked for me very well is going to places where there is no signal. Because I know the phone can be a very addictive device, because it's there, you just touch the screen.
Yeah, it's deliberately meant.
It's deliberately done that way. The screen will light up and it will, the screen will be whispering to you, Rhoda, come here, touch me. Right? So I go to places. Yes, exactly, the precious. We have things for you. There are notifications. Check the notifications.
Put down the phone.
Put down the phone. But when I figure I can't put down the phone, I go to where the phone is not going to be able to wake up. So a no signal area. Or I take I just switch off, I demobilize data on the phone. And give myself, sometimes not even a long stretch of time, an hour or two. And now I give myself a deadline in the night to not be on the phone. So by 9-10 o'clock, that's it. The phone is not in my hand. Good. And I'm reading, or sometimes looking at crap on Netflix, but I'm reading. Because I want to give myself the opportunity to continue to feed my brain. Because I feel like if I'm not doing that, it's just not, I am making sense,
Something strange has happened to me. I have actually started to enjoy history again.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Good.
I'd fallen out of love with it. That's how I ended up in politics.
Mm-hmm.
I've actually started to enjoy it again.
What are you reading? What are you reading these days?
I read Ferocity.
Right.
I was reading Williams again, Capitalism and Slavery.
Right.
What else, boy? I read a good book on anthropology. I can't remember the title. A guy dissecting that 19th century anthropological bias, that white superiority nonsense. I don't remember the title, but I'll send it to you.
Okay.
But I've been reading eclectic. There's no rhyme or reason, no pattern. Anything that is vaguely interesting, I've been reading.
Yeah.
It's like rediscovering the love for education again.
Yeah.
It has been a wonderful thing.
Just the joy of learning, really. Just to stumble upon new ideas, new information. I hear you on that
Yeah.
score.
The thing is, I've never been home for any stretch of time before, and your mind loses sharpness very quickly.
Yes, it does.
So to keep it going, I've been feeding it all sorts of things. And I've
In-
also discovered the joy of YouTube.
Yes, I use.
Big Think and TED and
So because my eyes have this pandemic has, I mean, like, ravaged my eyes, because I'm working virtually now.
I can relate.
Working virtually now, and it's right, and it's all screens for everything, right? Screens to teach, screens for whatever. You need to do research. You're using a screen, that sort of thing. So now I listen to books more than I read the book.
Yeah.
I tend to, if I'm purchasing the book, I will purchase the Kindle Audible combination of the book. So if I feel like reading along while I'm listening, I can read along while I'm listening. Yeah. I listen to a lot of podcasts and the joys of YouTube. There's so much I'm learning off YouTube.
Yeah.
But what
there's a channel called Extra Credits. We do this kind of a cartoon history. You should check it. It's really really.
Then there are a couple. There's another channel I've looked at that does history and uses a lot of animation. And I was looking at it and thinking to myself, I may have to get the
some
tech.
Of them are really good.
Yeah, the tech person that I work with to find out whether or not he can show me how to use those things. So that way, some of what I'm doing with these live vlogs, I can incorporate that into it.
Some of this stuff some of it is questionable. Some of it interpretation is.
Yeah. I mean, you're always gonna have those problems.
Really.
But I agree with you. There's a way in which we can be using the technology not just for entertainment, but for very entertaining education. And so I've been trying to incorporate a lot of that, because I don't get a lot of time now for leisure reading. When you're reading legislation, legislation is not leisure reading for me at all.
Tell me about it.
All right. So I listen to books now, or listen to podcasts now for leisure. That's how most nights. That's how I go to bed. I'll put on a podcast, or I'll put on a book and listen to it until I fall asleep. But love it. It's been so much fun. It's been great fun.
Learning is life.
Yeah, it is.
Learning is life.
If you're not learning, you're really. I mean, it doesn't leave. Yeah, you are. You're pretty much dead.
You're dead. Yeah, learning, and we have a contingent here that is averse to learning, because they've never discovered the joys of it.
Yeah,
we need to find a way to get them to see it.
It's kind of hard, right? No. Before you say the last thing, stick a pin.
Yeah.
It's hard to get anybody to discover the joy of learning if they only see learning as a means to an end, not as a journey, right? Yeah. If they only see learning as this is how I can make money, then there's never going to be any joy in learning. But learning is a journey, and it's a journey of not just you exploring information, but you exploring yourself. And if you have no desire to explore yourself, you are not going to enjoy that journey of education.
Indeed. When I look at the timeline of our educational development, I think that we do too much of two things. We criticize too much, and we fail to acknowledge when we've done well.
Yeah.
And we fail, let me add one more, we're very much averse to change. We've done well with what we had.
Yeah.
What was given to us, what was forced down our throat, we've done well. We've done very well. And this is a developmental thing, so I mean, we are a young country and these things take time. We've yet to take that next step, which is to take it and make it really dynamic and innovative and work for us. But we're still grappling with that colonial past.
Yeah.
We still think that the best solutions come from overseas and we can't create things ourselves and we can't make things.
Yeah, we don't think
One
of
of the
ourselves
things
as
I
world
was,
class at all, eh? Very few
one of
of
the
us
things I
think.
was doing, I was trying to do at my time in the ministry was take us forward technologically to the point where I had a team that was creating software, creating platforms, and I had the pleasure, probably the first minister of education ever, to say to somebody that we at the MOE do not use other people's technology, we create our own. And not just to give the sense through the system that we can do it, but at the head. If the head understands that we can create things ourselves, the body will fall in line. I was very happy about some of the things that we implemented. It made teaching and learning easier for the teachers. And I think that with a bit of courage and with a bit of, I don't want to say mischief or disruptiveness, but a bit of understanding that we can't stay in that conservative box and really become the country we want to be, that we will be fine. Well, we've done well, but there is another threshold that we can reach.
Yeah.
It will require us to become a bit uncomfortable before we become comfortable.
We have another frontier that we need to go and chart. There's another frontier to go and chart. And I am very happy to say what we really need is we need a lot more mischief and disruption. But it's a certain kind of mischief and disruption, not the misinformation and fake news that we're dealing up with right now. A different
to challenge what is there and to create something different.
Yeah.
And to try different things.
Yeah. And I'm very much for that, very much trying that in my own way. To disrupt and to get people to think differently, which is part of the whole point of what I'm doing here with this platform. I just want to get people to start to think differently and to challenge what they think they know and to understand that to challenge it, you have to do it from a position of information. You have to be informed first.
You have to be informed.
Yeah. Lovell, thank you so much.
I'm happy to contribute to your experiment.
Yes, I'm going to pull you back because the audience here is saying that, you deserve a callback interview, etc., etc., etc. I think they learned a lot from the engagement.
You don't know that we used to do this every week? Sometimes every other day.
Yes, exactly. Anytime the both of us were lost on the corridor somewhere and we bump into each other, that was it. This is what happened. Thank you so much.
It was a pleasure. It was my pleasure.
It was certainly my pleasure. Don't forget to WhatsApp me those things, right? The name of the book and
I will.
All right, cool. Take it easy. Have a good evening.
All right, peace.
All right.
You
bye.
too. All the best. Bye-bye.
So there you have it. We talked about the stereotype of black people being dunce, being perceived as dunce. We talked about colonial history. We looked at we looked at eugenics, right? The whole science behind racism. We talked about the movement of the various developments, watershed period in colonial education here, down to independence. And we even talked about what is needed in education contemporarily. A wide-ranging discussion. I hope you guys enjoyed it. So, I'm not having a live on Sunday evening because Sunday night at 8 o'clock, I will be interviewing the Attorney General. So I'll be prepping Sunday evening to have those hard questions ready to interview the Attorney General on his program, AG Talks. So look out for the link. It will be on his page. I will also put it on the News Source page. And so that way you guys can tune in and see me and the Attorney General having a conversation with each other about what does he really do? What is the point of the Office of the Attorney General? So tune in for that. And thank you so much for showing up and spending time with me this evening.